Imagine pouring your heart into something only to have it ripped apart in front of an entire classroom. That's exactly what happened to 16-year-old Emily Carter. She had always been a quiet, hard-working student, never the type to cause trouble or seek attention. But when her English teacher, Mr. Reynolds, picked up her essay and read it aloud, his face twisted with disgust. The classroom fell silent as he began tearing her work apart, mocking her writing, her ideas, even the way she structured her sentences. The other students shifted uncomfortably in their seats, exchanging uneasy glances. Some let out nervous chuckles, too afraid to stand up for her. Others stared down at their desks, pretending not to hear. But Mr. Reynolds didn't stop. He kept going, picking at every flaw, every mistake, completely unaware of who Emily really was, or more importantly, who her father was. Emily sat frozen, her fingers gripping the edges of her desk. She had spent hours on that assignment, carefully crafting each word, making sure every sentence carried meaning. Writing had always been her passion, something deeply personal to her. And now in front of everyone, it was being ridiculed like it was worthless. She could feel the sting of humiliation creeping up her throat, but she refused to let a single tear fall. If only Mr. Reynolds knew the truth. If only he had the slightest idea of who had inspired her writing, of the man who had spent years teaching her the art of storytelling. But he didn't. And that was his first mistake. What happened next would change everything. Emily's hands trembled beneath the desk, hidden from view as her nails dug into her palms. She knew better than to react, to give Mr. Reynolds the satisfaction of seeing her crumble. The weight of the students' stares burned into her skin, and the air in the classroom felt suffocatingly thick. She forced herself to breathe evenly, gripping onto the only truth that mattered. This wasn't just about a poorly received essay. No, there was something else at play, something darker lurking beneath the surface. Because just days ago, before she ever handed in that paper, she had discovered something she wasn't supposed to. It had started with a whisper, a hushed conversation she wasn't meant to overhear. Emily had been in the library, tucked away in her usual corner near the back shelves, when she heard voices low, urgent, almost conspiratorial. She hadn't thought much of it at first, until she recognized one of them. Mr. Reynolds. His voice was sharp, edged with a nervousness she had never heard from him before. The other voice was unfamiliar, but deep and commanding, with a tone that sent a chill down her spine. Their words had been fragmented, but one thing was clear: they were talking about something being hidden, something that couldn't be found. Emily had leaned in, careful not to make a sound, but before she could hear anything more, a book had slipped from the shelf beside her and hit the floor with a dull thud. The voices immediately stopped. A tense silence followed, and for a brief moment, Emily thought she might have gotten away with it. But then, the heavy footsteps approached. She barely had time to react before Mr. Reynolds rounded the corner, his expression unreadable. His eyes met hers, and for the briefest second, she saw something flash across his face: panic. Then, just as quickly, it was gone, replaced by his usual stern demeanor. "What are you doing here?" he had asked, his voice measured, but there was something off about the way he looked at her. Emily had swallowed hard, forcing herself to stay calm. "Studying," she had replied, holding up the book in her hands, hoping he wouldn't notice the slight shake in her fingers. For a moment, he simply stared at her, as if trying to decide whether or not to believe her. Then, without another word, he turned and walked away. Emily had stayed frozen in place, heart pounding, waiting until she was sure he was gone before she allowed herself to breathe again. She hadn't realized how deeply that moment had unsettled her until now, as she sat in the classroom with her essay in shreds before her. Because what had she written about? A story, a simple fictional narrative, or at least, that's what it was supposed to be. But in that story, she had described a teacher who wasn't who he seemed, a man hiding something, someone involved in something dangerous. It had been a stretch of the imagination, or at least that's what she had told herself when she wrote it. But now, sitting there as Mr. Reynolds continued to tear apart her words with an almost personal venom, she couldn't help but wonder, had she gotten too close to something real? Had she unknowingly written about something that wasn't fiction at all? And if that was the case, then the real question wasn't why Mr. Reynolds was so intent on humiliating her. It was what he was so desperate to keep hidden. As soon as the bell rang, signaling the end of class, Emily bolted from her seat, shoving her shredded essay into her backpack before anyone could say a word. She could still feel the weight of the humiliation pressing against her chest, but something heavier sat beneath it, an unshakable suspicion that this was more than just a cruel lesson in public critique. Mr. Reynolds had gone too far, his words laced with something beyond simple criticism. It had felt personal, almost like a warning. But why? What was he so afraid she might uncover? Emily barely made it to her locker before she heard the voice behind her, low, urgent, and far too close. "You need to stop." She spun around to see Liam Harding, a boy she barely knew outside of the occasional partnered assignment in class. He was one of those students who existed on the periphery, never standing out, never causing trouble, just slipping through the cracks unnoticed. But right now, his usual indifference was gone. His green eyes darted around the crowded hallway before settling back on her with an intensity that made her skin prickle. Emily frowned. "What are you talking about?" Liam exhaled sharply, shifting his weight as if debating whether or not to even say anything more. Then, in a voice so low, she had to strain to hear it over the chaos of students shuffling past, he muttered, "Whatever you think you're looking for, just drop it." A chill ran down Emily's spine. He wasn't just warning her, he was afraid. She narrowed her eyes, refusing to let him rattle her. "What do you know?" But before he could answer, a sharp bang echoed through the hallway. A janitor's cart had tipped over at the far end, sending a pile of papers skidding across the floor. For a split second, the noise drew everyone's attention, including Liam's. And in that moment of distraction, when he turned his head just slightly, Emily saw it. Tucked into the front pocket of his backpack was something unmistakable, her essay. The very one that Mr. Reynolds had shredded just minutes ago. Her stomach twisted. How did he have it? And more importantly, why? Before she could confront him, Liam took a step back. "Just leave it alone, Emily," he murmured. Then, without another word, he turned and disappeared into the crowd, leaving her standing there, heart pounding, her mind racing with more questions than ever. Something was happening, something bigger than she had ever imagined. But if they thought a few threats and stolen papers were enough to make her stop, they were wrong. Dead wrong. Emily barely noticed the rest of the school day slipping by, her mind too tangled in the unsettling encounter with Liam. The way he had looked at her, like he knew something she didn't, like he was stuck in the middle of something he couldn't escape, left a gnawing feeling in her gut. And then there was the essay, or what was left of it. How had he gotten it? Had he taken it before Mr. Reynolds destroyed it, or had someone else given it to him? The questions swirled in her head, growing louder with each passing moment, but she didn't have a single answer. All she knew was that she wasn't the only one being pulled into something dangerous. That night, as she sat on her bed, the remnants of her essay spread out before her, she reached for her phone, her fingers hesitating over the screen. There was only one person she could trust to help her make sense of this, her older brother, Ryan. He had graduated 2 years ago and was now in college a few hours away, but he had always been the one person she could count on to see through the lies, to piece together things others missed. With a deep breath, she tapped out a message, trying to keep it vague but urgent. "Did anything ever seem off about Mr. Reynolds when you were at Westfield? I think he's hiding something." A minute passed. Then 2. Just as she was about to toss her phone aside, the screen lit up with an incoming call. Ryan never called unless it was serious. Her heart thumped as she answered. "Emily." His voice was sharper than usual, edged with something she couldn't quite place. "Why are you asking about Reynolds?" She hesitated. "Something weird happened today," she admitted, lowering her voice instinctively, as if someone might be listening. "I think he's trying to keep me from looking into something. And there's this guy, Liam Harding, he had my essay, Ryan. The one Reynolds tore up in front of the whole class. How is that even possible?" Silence. A long, heavy pause that made her stomach twist. "Listen to me," Ryan finally said, his voice unusually tense. "Drop it, Whatever you think you're onto, it's not worth it." Her grip on the phone tightened. "Ryan, what do you know?" Another pause, but this time, she could hear something else in the background, muffled voices, the sound of movement, like he wasn't alone. When he spoke again, his voice was lower, almost urgent. "I have to go. Just be careful, okay?" And then the line went dead. Emily stared at her phone, her pulse hammering in her ears. Ryan was hiding something. He knew exactly why Mr. Reynolds was acting strange, why Liam was involved, why she was being warned to stop. And for the first time since this had started, real fear crept in. Because if Ryan, the one person who never backed down from anything, was telling her to let this go, it meant whatever she was caught up in was bigger, more dangerous than she had ever imagined. But before she could even process what to do next, her phone vibrated again. Another message. But this one wasn't from Ryan. It was an unknown number. And it contained only 4 words. "You're asking the wrong questions." Her breath hitched. Her fingers hovered over the screen, unsure whether to reply, whether to ignore it, whether to throw her phone across the room. But before she could decide, another message appeared. "Check your window." A cold shiver ran down her spine. Slowly, she turned her head toward the window, her heartbeat hammering in her ears. The curtains were drawn, but the unsettling weight of being watched settled over her like a heavy fog. She wasn't alone. Someone was out there, and they were waiting for her to make a move. Emily's hands felt ice cold as she slowly reached for the edge of the curtain, her breath shallow, her body frozen between the overwhelming need to know and the deep primal fear that warned her not to look. The message had been so precise, so confident, whoever sent it wasn't just playing games. They wanted her to know they were out there, watching. Her fingers trembled as she gripped the fabric, heart hammering in her chest. With a slow exhale, she yanked it open in one swift motion, eyes scanning the darkness beyond the glass. At first, there was nothing. Just the quiet suburban street, the dim glow of a street lamp flickering against the pavement. The trees rustled slightly in the wind, and for a split second, she thought maybe, just maybe, this was all in her head. But then she saw it. A figure, standing just beyond the pool of light, cloaked in shadows. Still, unmoving, watching. Her throat tightened. The logical part of her brain screamed at her to close the curtains, to pretend she hadn't seen anything, to act like this was nothing more than a prank. But her instincts told her the truth. This wasn't random. This wasn't harmless. Someone was making sure she knew that she wasn't safe. Then, just as she reached for her phone to take a picture, the figure moved. Not toward her, not away, but sideways, slipping into the darkness between houses, vanishing as if they had never been there at all. Her pulse pounded in her ears. She needed to tell someone. Ryan? No, he had already made it clear he wouldn't talk. The police? And say what? That a stranger had stared at her from across the street. That she'd gotten a few cryptic text messages. They wouldn't take her seriously. As she tried to steady her breathing, another vibration buzzed against her palm. Another message from the unknown number. Now you see. A wave of nausea rolled over her. She dropped her phone onto the bed, like it was laced with poison. This wasn't just a warning. It was a statement. And then, just as she was trying to gather her thoughts, Trying to figure out what to do next, her phone rang. She flinched at the sudden noise, her heart lurching into her throat. "Ryan," she answered immediately. "Ryan, something is." "Emily." His voice was sharp, but not in the way it usually was when he was being protective. No, this was different. There was something raw in his tone, something she had never heard from him before. "Fear. Listen to me. I don't have time to explain, but you need to leave the house. Right now." Her stomach dropped. "What? Why? What's going on?" "I messed up," he said, his words rushed, frantic. "I thought it was over. I thought if I stayed quiet, it wouldn't follow you." His breathing was uneven, and she could hear movement in the background like he was walking, or maybe running. "They're not going to stop him. You have to go." Her fingers tightened around the phone. "Who is they? Ryan? What did you do?" A noise outside made her blood run cold, a soft thud against the side of the house. Someone was there, right outside. Ryan's voice became even more urgent. "Get out now, Emily. Don't pack, don't think. Just go." The call cut out. A lump formed in her throat as she stared at the phone screen. The connection was dead. No service. And then, as if the universe wanted to make it perfectly clear just how serious this was, the power in her room flickered once, twice, before cutting out completely, plunging her into darkness. This was real, and she was out of time. Emily's body moved before her mind could catch up, her instincts screaming at her to get out. She grabbed her phone and bolted for the door, her fingers barely wrapping around the handle, before she heard it, another sound, closer this time. A deliberate, slow movement just outside her window. Whoever was out there wasn't trying to hide anymore. They wanted her to know they were coming. Her breath hitched as she yanked the door open and sprinted down the hallway, her socks slipping against the hardwood floors. The house felt suffocatingly silent, the kind of silence that pressed against her ears, amplifying her own ragged breathing. She reached the front door, her shaking hands fumbling with the lock. Just as she turned it, a sharp knock pounded against the wood 3 times, heavy and forceful. She staggered back, a cold sweat breaking out across her skin. And then, just as suddenly, a voice called out, "Emily, open the door." Her heart nearly stopped. She knew that voice. Liam. Her fingers hovered over the lock, confusion battling against the icy fear in her veins. What was he doing here? How did he even know where she lived? She hesitated for only a second before stepping closer, pressing her eye against the peephole. But when she looked outside, her stomach twisted into a knot so tight she thought she might be sick. Liam stood on the porch, but he wasn't alone. Behind him, barely visible in the shadows, was another figure. A man, tall, broad-shouldered, standing just far enough back that she couldn't make out his face. Something was wrong. She took a step away from the door. "What are you doing here, Liam?" Her voice was steadier than she felt. "I need to talk to you," he said, but there was something off in his tone. Like he was trying too hard to sound casual, like he was reciting a line he'd been given. "It's important." Emily swallowed hard. "Who's with you?" A pause. Too long. Then no one. "I came alone." Liar. The air in the house felt too thick, pressing against her ribs, making it harder to breathe. Her mind raced. Liam had warned her before, told her to stop digging, told her to walk away. And now, after everything, after the messages, after Ryan's frantic phone call, he was just here, at her house in the middle of the night. No, this wasn't a coincidence. She took another step back, her mind screaming at her to get out. "I can't," she said, forcing the words out through dry lips. "Whatever you need to say, tell me tomorrow." Another pause. Then something in Liam's posture shifted, his shoulders tensing, his head tilting slightly like he was listening to someone she couldn't hear. The hairs on the back of her neck stood up. "Emily," he said softly, "we don't have time for this." Her stomach flipped. She turned and ran. Not toward the front door, not toward the obvious escape. She knew better. If Liam was here, if whoever was with him was waiting in the dark, then they had planned this. They were expecting her to run, which meant she had to do the one thing they wouldn't expect. She sprinted toward the basement door. Throwing it open, she plunged down the stairs 2 at a time, her heart slamming against her ribs. The darkness swallowed her whole, but she didn't stop. Her hands flew out, reaching blindly, feeling for the metal shelving unit against the far wall. She knew it was here. She knew. Her fingers brushed against the cold edge of the panel. Her father's safe. She barely remembered the code, but her hands moved on instinct, twisting the dial, ignoring the muffled voices upstairs, the way the floorboards creaked under the weight of movement. She had seconds, maybe less. The lock clicked. The door swung open. And then her breath caught. Inside the safe wasn't money, or papers, or anything she had expected. It was a file, thick, stuffed with loose pages and old photographs. And scrawled across the front, in handwriting she knew better than her own, was a name that made her entire body go numb. Ryan Carter, her brother's name. She stared at it, her mind refusing to process what she was seeing. Her hands trembled as she flipped it open, scanning the contents, her brain desperately trying to make sense of the mess of documents and redacted reports. And then buried beneath a stack of yellowed pages she found it. A photograph. It was grainy black and white, but she recognized the person instantly. Mr. Reynolds. Only it wasn't him. Not exactly. He looked younger, his face harder, meaner. And beside him, wearing an expression that made her blood turn to ice, was her brother. Ryan, standing next to the man who had humiliated her in front of the entire class. She clamped a hand over her mouth. Nothing made sense anymore. And then, just as the realization crashed over her, just as she pieced together the horrifying truth, she heard the basement door creak open. They were inside, and they were coming for her. Emily barely had time to react before the footsteps above her grew louder, moving with purpose, with direction. They knew where she was. Her hands shook as she clutched the photograph tighter, her mind racing. None of this was a coincidence. Mr. Reynolds. Ryan. The warnings. The messages. The stranger outside her window. It had all been leading to this moment. But why? What had Ryan done? The basement door groaned open wider, and the sound of heavy boots descending the stairs sent a spike of fear straight through her chest. She was out of time. She shoved the file back into the safe, but the photograph, she couldn't let it go. Stuffing it into the waistband of her jeans, she forced herself to move, ducking behind an old shelving unit stacked with dusty boxes. The first figure stepped into the dim light. Liam. His face was unreadable, his hands clenched into fists at his sides. But it was the man behind him that made Emily's stomach twist. He finally stepped forward, revealing himself from the shadows. Mr. Reynolds. Emily bit the inside of her cheek so hard she tasted blood. She should have known. Where is it? Reynolds' voice was calm, controlled, but there was a sharpness beneath it, like a blade just beneath the surface. Liam didn't respond. He just glanced around the basement, scanning the space. His eyes flickered for the briefest moment toward the safe, and Emily swore her heart stopped. He knew. She pressed herself tighter against the shelving unit, praying the shadows would keep her hidden. Reynolds exhaled, slow and deliberate. "You hesitated," he muttered, and the words were like ice. "That tells me she found something." Liam shifted his weight, but didn't move. Reynolds took a step closer. "You told me you could handle this, that we wouldn't have a problem." He let the words hang in the air, and Emily could feel the weight of them pressing down on Liam like a vice. "But here we are." Emily barely dared to breathe. "I'm handling it," Liam finally said, but there was something off in his tone, like he was trying to convince himself. Reynolds tilted his head, studying him. Then, without warning, he pulled a gun from his jacket and pressed it against Liam's side. Emily's stomach dropped. Her fingers curled around the photograph like it was the only thing tethering her to reality. "Then prove it," Reynolds murmured. The silence was suffocating. Liam didn't move, didn't react. But Emily could see the tension in his shoulders, the way his jaw clenched just slightly. And then, slowly, he turned his head just enough that Emily could see his face. And for the first time, she saw it. The truth. Liam wasn't here to hurt her. He was stalling. For her. Her chest tightened. Reynolds let out a frustrated sigh and took a step back, lowering the gun but not putting it away. "You have 5 minutes," he said flatly. "And if she's not here by then, I'll find her myself." Liam gave a short nod. And then, just as quickly as they had come, they turned and headed back up the stairs. The second the door clicked shut, Emily finally let out the breath she'd been holding. She had 5 minutes. 5 minutes to make a choice. She could run. She could disappear into the night, leave everything behind, and never look back. But if she did, she might never get answers. She'd never know what Ryan had done, what Liam's real role in all of this was, why Reynolds had gone to such lengths to keep her from the truth. Or she could do the unthinkable. She could confront Liam. She could step out of the shadows, put everything on the line, and demand the truth, knowing full well it might cost her everything. Her pulse pounded in her ears. 5 minutes. And she had to decide. Emily's mind raced, every second slipping through her fingers like sand in an hourglass. She could hear them upstairs, Reynolds pacing, Liam's muffled voice responding, the weight of their presence pressing down on the house like a slow-moving storm. 5 minutes. Maybe less. She had spent her entire life believing that people were who they claimed to be. That teachers were just teachers, that friends were just friends, that family was unshakable. But the file in her waistband told a different story. Ryan had been part of something bigger, something dangerous. Reynolds wasn't just some bitter, overbearing teacher. And Liam. Liam was caught between them all, fighting a battle she didn't fully understand. But she was done being a pawn in a game she didn't even know she was playing. Steeling herself, she moved quickly, silently, navigating the basement with precision. There was only one way out that didn't involve walking straight into Reynolds' hands. The old storm doors in the back, rusted at the hinges, but still functional. She reached for the latch, barely daring to breathe, as she pulled it open inch by inch, the metal groaning under the strain. If Reynolds heard, if Liam didn't keep him distracted, she was finished. A final tug, and the door swung open, revealing the cold night air. She slipped through, heart hammering, as she sprinted toward the tree line at the edge of the property. If she could get to the street, if she could disappear into the dark, she could figure out her next move. But then, as she reached the edge of the trees, a figure stepped out from the shadows. She skidded to a stop, her stomach plummeting. Ryan. Her brother stood there, his face pale under the dim streetlight, his hands at his sides empty, unthreatening. But there was something behind his eyes, something that made her throat tighten. He wasn't surprised to see her. She staggered back a step. "Ryan?" He exhaled, shaking his head. "You shouldn't have found that file, Em." Her blood ran cold. "You knew," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the rustling leaves. "You knew what was happening, and you didn't say anything." His expression twisted, guilt flashing across his features, but it wasn't enough. He wasn't panicking. He wasn't scared. He was just resigned. Because he wasn't here to save her. He was part of it. Emily's entire body locked up, 1,000 realizations slamming into her at once. Ryan's silence. His warning to stop. The way he had told her to run, but never actually helped her escape. He had never been on the outside of this. He had always been in it. "Tell me the truth," she said, forcing the words out through clenched teeth. All of it. Ryan hesitated, just for a second, but it was enough. Then he exhaled and finally spoke. Reynolds isn't just a teacher. He's an operative. He recruits people like me, like Liam. His voice was quiet, measured, like he'd been waiting for this moment. It's been happening for years. Westfield isn't a normal school, Em. It's a pipeline. They find kids with certain skills, certain intelligence, and they mold them into something useful. And once you're in, you don't get out. The words felt like a slap to the face. That's insane, she breathed. You're telling me our high school is some kind of— She couldn't even finish the sentence. It was too much, but Ryan's expression didn't waver. I was recruited before I even realized what was happening, he continued. They make you think you have a choice, but you don't. I thought if I played along, if I did what they wanted, I could protect you. Keep you away from all of it. His jaw clenched. But you didn't let it go. She shook her head, backing away. So what? Now you're here to bring me in. To hand me over to him. Ryan flinched like she had struck him. No, he said, and for the first time his voice cracked. I'm here to stop them. Emily's breath caught in her throat. They don't want to scare you off anymore, Em. They want to erase you. His voice dropped lower, urgency bleeding through. Reynolds thinks you're a loose end, and if you don't come with me right now, you won't get another chance. Everything inside her screamed not to trust him, but the sound of the front door slamming open, the heavy footfalls pounding down the porch steps, told her she didn't have time to debate. Reynolds was coming, and she had to decide if she was going to run or fight. Emily's pulse thundered in her ears as the footsteps closed in. Ryan was still in front of her, waiting for an answer, waiting for her to decide if she could trust him. But trust didn't exist anymore. Not after everything she had uncovered. Not after realizing that the brother she had looked up to her whole life had been lying to her from the very beginning. A car door slammed. Heavy boots hit the pavement. Reynolds wasn't alone. Emily's breath hitched as she glanced past Ryan's shoulder, catching a glimpse of the dark SUV parked at the curb. Two more figures emerged from the vehicle, their faces unreadable in the dim glow of the streetlight. This wasn't just about keeping her quiet anymore. This was an operation. A cleanup. She had been marked for elimination. Ryan stepped toward her, his expression tight with urgency. Emily, you don't have a choice anymore. But he was wrong. She did have a choice, and she wasn't going to let them decide for her. Without hesitation, she spun on her heel and ran. Not toward the trees this time, not toward safety. That wasn't an option anymore. Instead, she ran straight for the house, straight for the front porch, straight for the only place where she might have an advantage. She heard Ryan curse behind her, heard the sharp orders barked by Reynolds as he and his men took off after her. But she was faster. Fear and adrenaline pushed her forward as she hit the steps, shoving through the open front door and slamming it shut behind her. She had seconds. She sprinted down the hall, nearly slipping as she turned the corner. Her father had always been paranoid. He had always warned them about being prepared, about protecting themselves. At the time, she thought it was just a father being overprotective. Now, she knew better. Throwing open the office door, she lunged toward the bookshelf, reaching behind the row of leather-bound law books until her fingers found the cold steel of the handgun. The weight of it was heavier than she expected, but there was no time to hesitate. The front door burst open with a deafening crack. Emily spun, gun raised, finger hovering over the trigger as Reynolds stormed into the house, his face twisted in cold fury. "Put it down, Emily," he ordered, his voice calm. Too calm. He didn't see her as a threat. That was his mistake. Her hands trembled, but she held her ground. "You're not taking me." Reynolds let out a slow exhale, like he was disappointed. Like he had already written this ending in his head. "You don't understand what's happening here." "Oh, I understand perfectly," she shot back. "You're using Westfield to recruit kids, turning them into your personal assets. And when someone steps out of line," she gestured toward the door, toward the men waiting outside, "you erase them." Reynolds' eyes flickered, just for a second. A confirmation. He took a slow step forward. "This isn't about you, Emily. It was never supposed to be about you." His voice softened, as if that would somehow make a difference. "But you kept pushing. And now, I can't let you leave." Another step. Emily's hands clenched tighter around the gun. "I will shoot you." Reynolds stopped studying her. Calculating. "No, you won't," he said finally. "Because you're not like me." The words landed like a punch to the chest. Emily had spent so much time fighting against people like him, against the lies and the secrets, against the shadows that had been closing in on her since the very first message. But standing here, holding a gun, ready to pull the trigger, was she really any different? She hesitated. And in that single moment, Reynolds moved. Faster than she thought possible, he lunged, knocking the gun from her hands. Pain shot through her wrist as she stumbled back, but she didn't have time to recover. He grabbed her by the collar, shoving her hard against the desk, his grip tightening around her throat. "Should walked away," he muttered. Emily gasped, struggling, clawing at his arms. Her vision blurred, her lungs burned. And then, a gunshot. Reynolds' body jerked, his grip loosening. Blood bloomed across his shoulder, his face twisting in shock. He staggered back, barely managing to stay on his feet. Emily collapsed forward, coughing as air rushed back into her lungs. She turned toward the doorway, barely able to process what she was seeing. Ryan stood there, gun still raised, his expression unreadable. Reynolds let out a strained laugh, shaking his head. "Too late, kid," he muttered. "They're already coming." Ryan didn't hesitate. He fired again. This time, Reynolds dropped. Emily's breath came in sharp gasps, her body shaking as the reality of what just happened set in. Ryan didn't move, didn't speak. The weight of his decision, of the blood on his hands, was written all over his face. But there was no time to process it. Outside, the sound of approaching vehicles filled the air. Emily looked at Ryan. "What now?" He swallowed hard. "We run." And for the first time, she realized this wasn't over. This was just the beginning. The road stretched endlessly before them, dark and empty, the headlights cutting through the night like a blade. Emily sat in the passenger seat, her fingers gripping the worn fabric of her jeans, her mind still trying to catch up with everything that had happened. The weight of the past few hours pressed down on her chest, the echoes of gunshots still ringing in her ears. The image of Reynolds falling burned into her memory. She had spent so much time chasing the truth, only to realize that the truth wasn't something you found, it was something that destroyed everything in its path. Ryan's hands were tight on the steering wheel, his knuckles white as he drove, his expression unreadable. He had always been the steady one, the protector, the person she had turned to when the world didn't make sense. But now, he looked like a man with no road left to follow, like someone who had spent too long making impossible choices and had finally run out of options. He had killed Reynolds, had made the decision that she hadn't been able to make. And yet, as much as she wanted to believe it was over, that they were finally free, she knew better. The SUV's clock glowed dimly 3:27 a.m. They had been driving for hours, putting as much distance as possible between them and the nightmare they had left behind. But distance didn't erase reality. Westfield wasn't just a school. It was something bigger, something darker, something that had existed long before she ever started asking questions. And it wouldn't just disappear because one man was gone. If Reynolds had people above him, if this was truly an operation that had been running for years, then there would be others. People who wouldn't stop until every loose end was tied up. People who wouldn't stop until she and Ryan were dead. She turned to look at him, searching his face for any sign that he had a plan, that he knew what to do next. But he just kept driving, his jaw clenched tight, his eyes locked on the road ahead. "They're not going to let us go," she said finally, breaking the silence. Her voice was quieter than she intended, but steady. Ryan didn't respond at first. He just exhaled slowly, shaking his head. "No," he admitted. "They won't. The words settled between them like a weight neither of them could lift. Emily leaned back against the seat, staring up at the stars through the windshield. Everything she had known about her life, her school, her friends, even her own family, had been a lie. The thought of it made her feel untethered, like she was floating in a space where nothing was real anymore. But for the first time, she wasn't afraid. The fear that had been gnawing at her since the first message, the paranoia that had followed her every step, had been replaced with something else. Determination. "They recruited you," she said, glancing at Ryan. "And they failed. So now they're going to come after me." Ryan finally looked at her, his expression dark with understanding. "Yes." A slow breath filled her lungs, steadying her. "Then we stop running." Ryan's eyes flickered with something unreadable, but he didn't argue. Maybe because he knew she was right. Maybe because he had spent so much of his life following their rules, playing their game, that he had never considered what it meant to break it. But Emily wasn't interested in playing anymore. If they wanted to erase her, they would have to try harder. Because now, she wasn't just a loose end. She was a threat. The road stretched on, the future uncertain, but Emily had never been more sure of one thing: this wasn't the end of the story. It was just the beginning. Thank you for watching, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more stories of inner strength and secrets.